Welcome to the Prospective Doctor podcast, brought to you by Med School Coach. Each week we cover topics related to the pre-med journey to medical school and beyond, from the MCAT to completing your application and from starting medical school to choosing a specialty. Our podcast will provide essential information for anyone contemplating a career in medicine.
Medical and healthcare students will nearly inevitably come across the financial burden of student loans. Planning ahead and knowing what your options are is a great way to make sure you don't become one of the many physicians caught under the heavy load of student loan repayment. Hi, everyone. This is Chase DiMarco, normal host of the Medical Nemesis podcast and your guest host today. I'm joined by Travis Hornby from Student Loan Planner, and he's here to tell us exactly how to plan and prepare for our student loans, obstacles, and options that might exist. Hi, Travis.
Hey, Chase. Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. And this will be kind of one of those mandatory episodes, I think, that all students should be aware of, since we all need to deal with student loans at some point or another. And there's so much confusion behind it, all the different options, the different repayment plans, the different just normal things that we're going to come across barrier-wise. So I'm glad you're here to help clarify some of these issues and discuss some of the options in more detail.
Yeah. I mean, it's always fun to talk about student loans, about as fun as getting your teeth pulled, right? So I'll try to make it kind of more enjoyable, a little bit more interesting and useful to people than you might expect.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, hopefully no one's clicked away when they heard me say student loans at the beginning of the episode.
People dread it. I mean, people don't want to talk about it. It's the kind of thing where you're like, oh, tell me about your divorce, or, tell me about your car accident you had when you were a kid or something. It's just something that kind of brings up feelings of anxiety and stress, and in some cases depression and pain. And it's kind of an understandable thing because it was a lot cheaper to go to school back in the day, right?
Yep. You didn't need to have two jobs and still require student loans to just survive.
Yeah. Well, like back in the day, you could go to med school or, any graduate school for 5 figures of some sort total over the 4 years summed up together. And if you came from sort of a privileged background, then maybe you came out with even less. And so you came out of school thinking when somebody gets a car loan, it's kind of and they admit that it was a bad decision. And they're like, oh man, that was a dumb mistake. Stupid me. But that's the extent of it. And so it's kind of like when you went to med school back in the day, or when you went to grad school back in the day, you took out your 50, 60K and you're like, oh man, that was a silly me. But now you come out with 300 and you can't quite say that without feeling these pangs of regret and anxiety and guilt, right? So it's it's sort of a different level of emotion that's conjured up today than it was back in the 70s and 80s, when people were both making the solid money and also having the lack of worrying about the cost of the education.
Yeah. So at least through podcasts like this, we can disseminate free information to help students out, help them learn about the obstacles they're either going through now or will in the near future, depending on where they are in their paths. So I guess the first place is just, where should we start when we're thinking about this? When should we start planning? How should we approach it if a student is early on, let's say even pre-med or earlier?
Yeah, I mean, so you want to take out all federal loans if you can help it. So most physicians have no idea whether they're going to work at a not-for-profit hospital or a academic or a private practice environment. Most just don't know. Most kind of take what's available in the geographic region where they want to live when they graduate. Some people do know. Some people are really committed to academic only. The only people that I've found that are committed to the private practice only are the people that come out with mom or dad has a practice and they want to take it over. I mean, that's kind of the only people that I find are sure they're going to do private practice. So if you take out private loans, you have to pay them off. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's like you took out a private loan from a lender or a bank, and they're going to make their money back, and you're going to pay them back in full because you're a physician and you've got a good credit score, and they're never going to let you out of it. No bankruptcy judge is ever going to let you out of it because you've got plenty of income. So the kind of flip side to that is, if you don't know that you're going to go work in a private environment or a public sector environment, that you don't want to take out any private loans because you might get public service loan forgiveness. So this is really important even for pre-med. So pre-med's going to undergrad, they can finance it through mostly federal loans, mostly private loans. A lot of people take out 30, 40K in private loans because they think the interest rate's better. Well, what if that entire amount that you took out from undergrad could be completely forgiven, tax-free? And that's exactly what happens. A lot of people go to medical school, they take out a bunch of debt, they consolidate all of their undergrad and graduate debt together, and then they pay that loan off with an income-based program for 10 years while employed at a not-for-profit hospital. At the end of those 10 years, the loan's forgiven tax-free. So right there is a potential 5-figure mistake, financing a little bit of your undergrad the wrong way. So that's the mistake you can make with pre-med, is basically financing stuff with private loans, which is a big mistake.
Okay, stay away from private loans, lesson number one.
Yes. Don't get suckered into the interest rate difference. The interest rate difference is not the important thing. The important thing is the difference in the forgiveness terms and the borrower repayment options.
And I guess that's where it gets really complicated. A lot of students are still maybe unsure of how loans work with bankruptcy and the differences in student loans versus normal loans, and the difference in, as you're explaining, the private loans and what can qualify for repayment later on. So besides just stay away from private loans as a basic, number one rule, is there maybe a number two rule that they should think about?
Yeah. So I would say this. So like, there's probably not a medical school that necessarily like drastically increases your chances at a certain specialty, but if there is, then go ahead and go to that program and go to the one that gives you the best chance of matching into whatever it is you're trying to match it to. If you want to do some sort of specialist, urology, dermatology, one of the more competitive specialties, if you are looking at going to a DO school versus an MD school or allopathic school, prioritize the place that gives you the best career options for what you're expecting to do post-graduation, right? Not to say that you can't come out of a school that's more primary care focus and do a specialist rotation, or a residency. That's certainly something you can do, but don't stress so much about the cost, because the cost, unfortunately, is really backwards and really messed up today. The system doesn't really reflect kind of the true cost of medical school anymore, because you're paying a percentage of your income for 10 years and most of it's forgiven. So not a lot of people are actually literally paying for med school the old-fashioned way, which is to pay off the student debt in full. The only people that really are, to be honest, are probably specialists. So specialists kind of do tend to going in the private practice world. They're taking out debt, but they're taking out enough income that they can actually pay it off, and it makes sense to pay it off. Whereas a lot of people that go into primary care actually need to be using the even in private practice, they can use loan forgiveness in the 20-year version. They can do it over 20 years instead of 10 years, which is different than a lot of what people expect. So more and more people every single year are needing to use forgiveness because of the way the debts are relative to incomes. And it's just really important for people to realize that, lest they make a big mistake.
This is definitely not an area that I claim to be an expert in any means, but I seem to hear a lot, especially in the physician finance groups, that go to the cheapest school you can find, basically. The school doesn't matter. Your grades are going to matter, your extracurriculars, your letters of recommendation. That's what's really going to play a huge part in your residency. So where you end up going later on, what specialty and location. So if we take that advice, I would say maybe that's a good one just to add as maybe a number 2.5 even. Just go to the cheapest school you can get into.
Well, let's push back against that a little bit, right? So what are the residency placements for like Harvard Medical School, right? Maybe that's not the right example, because obviously that's like super
top tier.
Top tier. Like maybe pick a second tier private school. But if you take a second tier private school and then you compare those residency placements to the residency placements of that cheapest school, like maybe it was better for you to go to the more expensive school. I'm not saying that it is. Like, you'd have to look at the placements, you'd have to look at the data, right? Yes, what do you call a doctor who got their degree from a cheaper school versus a more expensive school? You call them both doctor. Like, I get that. Like, that's definitely good advice. Like, especially if you think you're going to be in the top third of your class at that cheaper school, where you will be able to get access to those residencies in the more competitive specialties. But I'm just saying, be aware that with public service loan forgiveness, you might end up paying a similar price with you going to a public school that's cheap in a low cost of living area and a school that's in New York City where you're paying $3,000 a month for rent. So like, I just want people to be aware that you could end up paying almost the exact same cost for two different educations of wildly different prices because of public service loan forgiveness. And that's something that people definitely don't think about.
Wish I remember the numbers or if there are good stats on this, but the plan that most students have pre-meds going into med school, or even early med students towards the end of their third or fourth year when they're really starting to settle down and select a residency, a certain specialty they want to go into, the numbers change a lot. So we don't really know ahead of time. So
yeah,
I don't even know
4 years into the future you're predicting, right?
Yeah. So even attempting to do that is probably not feasible for most students. So in that aspect, if they're trying to approach this from an intellectual academic point of view and trying to say, all right, these are my top 3 or 4 most likely scenarios, there's got to be some calculations or spreadsheets or something that they can use to kind of figure out what their high and low might be, what the range is, what they can expect. Is that something that you guys also provide?
Yeah, well, we have 2 consults. We have a pre-debt consult and a post-debt consult. So the pre-debt consult is for that person that's going into medical school, trying to make different decisions as to what debt they should use, and should they borrow from family, should they borrow from the government, should they use private lenders, basically that kind of thing. So we give people unbiased advice as to what the best thing is for them to do for their future based off of what their plans are. So that's the kind of thing that avoids you mortgaging your parents' house when you could have benefited from a loan forgiveness program. And that's a 6-figure mistake, right? So that's the kind of thing we're trying to prevent for the pre-debt consult. For the post-debt consult, people already have the debt, they're in residency or they're in attending, and they're trying to figure out, hey, I just got married. How do I file my taxes? Should I file jointly or separately to have my spouse's payment counted in my income, in my income-based payment? Should I refinance? I get all these things in the mail every day from all these different companies telling me I should refinance. Should I do that? Or is that like a bad idea? Should I go for forgiveness? If so, do I have to worry about anything? Like, the media is telling me only 1% of people get approved for this public service program. Does that mean that I'm not going to get that program? Does that mean I'm not going to get approved? So that's kind of the thing that we want to try to dive into and just sort through the noise for people. Reality is your news media kind of places, they're not your CPA, they're not your financial advisor, they're not your consultant. They're just kind of saying stuff that gets the most clicks. Basically, besides maybe PBS, everybody is out there just trying to get the most clicks and the most return on their ad revenue, which is dependent upon page views, right? And if I tell you PSLF program is solid, yet there are minor technical glitches, you're not going to get a lot of people clicking on that article, right? That's pretty uninteresting, right? But if you say program totally broken, acceptance rate less than 1%, you're not going to get it. That freaks people out, right? And that's kind of the goal, is to freak people out and get you all worked up and terrorized. And that's just really kind of totally counterproductive, and it's just not true. The acceptance rate of PSLF has been low, but it's because of the way that the program started. It was really designed very poorly in the first few years of issuance, and so that's why it's not working in the first few years, but it's rapidly improving, and it's going to not pose any problem to people graduating, getting PSLF 10 years from now. It's not going to be an issue. So, again, it's just real important for people with student loans. You got to tune out the noise. There's so much noise. And this is for personal finance in general. I mean, if you listen to the media, you're going to feel like your solution to your finances is just go buy some more Tesla stock and raise your savings rate on your savings account by 0.5%. That's not going to solve anything. You really do have to tune out the noise and have a long-term plan and just set stuff on autopilot, so you can just let that autopilot engage and fly your finances, and so you don't have to tune in that much.
Yeah, I definitely like that, especially on certain social media systems now, at least Facebook groups. There are a lot of student and physician personal finance groups out there. So students can go get advice from any of those, find a couple that they like and follow, and just listen to what some of the more level-headed individuals might be saying than the media themselves.
Well, even with those groups, though, I mean, they're not your advisor. They're a woman or man on the internet, right? And not to discount that, there's obviously some groups out there that have extremely knowledgeable people, right? Like maybe even more knowledgeable than some professionals. So I'm not going to say that's not the case, right? But at the same time, like I do want to caution people, especially on like something complex, right? Like estate law, tax law, student loans, like are very complex. People that say they're not complex don't really appreciate how complex the rules really are, don't really understand how complex the rules are, right? So I'm just going to say, like, if somebody's kind of expecting to get professional level advice that people pay hundreds of dollars an hour for, there's a good chance that advice could be worth what you paid for it, which is nothing. I'm not saying that it's not, but I just want to make people cautious. Like, as a physician, you wouldn't go post something on a Facebook group about your heart condition and expect accurate advice about your specific situation from somebody on a Facebook group that is not a physician, right? I mean, the person might have been gone through a similar condition to you. They might be kind of a somewhat lay expert or something. Personal finance is not as complicated as medicine. I'm not saying that, but I do think that be cautious, be humble. Don't assume that like I'm saying this as somebody that tried to do this too back in the day, right? So like I had a friend of the family, had a really complex like estate tax situation. They could end up having 6 or 7 figure tax bill from their state tax, which you pay when you die. And I was like asking all these questions, like how do you get the I forget exactly how you call it, but the doubling of the tax exemption, do you need a trust for that, or can you just go ahead and just file an estate tax return to claim the unused exemption? I think it's like the DSUE exemption or something. And somebody posted on here, they said, yes, you're on the right track. And then they said, hold up for a second. This friend, whatever it is, uncle, whatever, they're willing to risk 6 or 7 figures to save a couple $1,000s in a competent estate attorney that has a fiduciary obligation to act in your best interest. And you're thinking that it's smart to come on here to a bunch of strangers on the internet and ask questions about specific forms that you need to fill out to ensure that this 6 or 7 figure mistake doesn't happen. Tell this person that not only are they cheap, they're potentially going to be making a stupid decision. No offense to you, they said, but probably hurting your friend more than you're helping, or you could be, right? And so I just want to, have people be cautious. Like I think it's great if people can certainly manage their own finances. There's no question. I don't want to discourage that, but I'm just saying, be cautious, because I think that's how a lot of bad decisions start, is on social media.
Okay, fair enough. You always want to do some due diligence when it comes to your finances. Make sure that you've taken the right precautions, maybe gotten a couple of points of view, see which one works best for your case too. Then I guess the next question is, let's say students later on, such as something I get all the time, is multiple mail requests. Like you said, different brokerages, different loan companies sending out, refinance with us. We'll give you this percent that looks really good on the surface value sometimes anyway. What is a good way to approach that? Or what is the difference with using a service such as yours and just applying to maybe multiple of those and seeing which one gives you the best rate?
Well, if you're just trying to refinance, you don't need to use our service. I mean, like if you're just trying to refinance, like studentloanplanner.com/refi, REFI, it's got all the banks on there. Just, go apply for free. And we try to make sure the best cash bonuses on the internet. You don't need to pay us a dime. Like what we try to do with those refinancing companies is most companies will just get paid commissions for sending people to those companies and not give the borrower anything. We try to take a lot lower commission to give the borrower the best cash bonus that's available that you're not going to get, even if you go apply directly. Basically, you're not going to get as good of a deal as if you went through us. So that's the refinancing part of things. So our consult service is not for that. What it's for is somebody who owes more money in student loan debt than what they earn every year. So in other words, if you are a pediatrician making $150,000 and you owe more than $150,000, you're a urologist who makes $300K who has debt that's in excess of $300K. That's who needs to hire us, because that person, it's not really clear what they should do with their loans. You might pursue forgiveness. You might pursue taxable forgiveness. You might pursue refinancing. And there's a question mark as to what the best way to do it is. Okay, so that's like the key. Other people that should hire us, people that live in community property states. There's a lot of complex rules for community property states that could cause a lot of people, especially those that are married, to have a lot lower payment than you might think that you have. So in other words, you can do some complex rules around like Form 8958, equally distribute taxes, equally distribute income across spouses, which can lower your payment by a lot. So in other words, people that live in like Texas, California, Washington State, those are some examples, but there's more like New Mexico, Arizona, Louisiana, Idaho. I'm probably missing a couple, but states like that have super complicated rules. So that's the group of people that need to make sure, like, hey, are you doing this? Are you thinking about this the right way? And the people who are just trying to get a lower interest rate, like, yeah, like we love that too. And people who are trying to just say, hey, like, screw you, I love getting my advice for free on the internet. Well, we have all that too. So definitely on the blog, like we definitely have all the free content you could want to make a good decision or a decent decision for yourself. So I don't want to discourage that. I'm just getting scared because I'm just seeing I'm seeing good groups on the internet, Chase, and I'm seeing a lot of like questionable groups where people are like Robinhood traders, and they're just like convinced that they're like this genius, because they made $1,000 on some call option they did or something, so it just spooks me a little bit.
Well, I guess I was more speaking of the ones that have been around for 10, 15 years, popular books, podcasts.
Yeah, those are great. Yeah, those are great. It's just getting scary, like whenever you have the good parts of that, you also have the bad parts. And there's some wild stories out there,
Well, actually, that might be a good way to really bring this home to the audience is, do you have a couple examples that might apply to certain people in the audience so they can really see how using your service might specifically apply to them?
Yeah. So let's say you've got I'm just going to pick, two OBGYNs married to each other. And one of them has a $100,000 debt and one of them has a $400,000 debt. And so we'll say they both make $200,000. So $500,000 of debt overall, 80% of it's with one person, 20% of it's with another person. And I'm just going to say they each make similar incomes, $200K, just to make it easy. And I'm doing all these numbers off the top of my head. Exact numbers, I have to reference my calculator. But so here's the thing. So if you pay based on married filing jointly, then your total payment would probably be around $3,500 a month. So that would be your total payment. And then $3,500 a month would get split 80% towards the spouse with the high debt and 20% towards the spouse with the low debt. And, let's say both of these spouses are at not-for-profit hospitals. That's $3,500 a month for however many extra years they need to do to get PSLF. Now, if they filed their taxes married filing separately, okay, and we had one spouse, instead of them both being on the repay plan, let's say that the spouse with the high debt was on the pay plan, pay as you earn, and then the spouse with the low debt was on the repay plan, the revised pay as you earn. So the payment for the spouse with the high debt would be about $1,500 a month. And the spouse on the repay plan, they would be based on a proportional payment of 20% of that $3,500. So that's about $700 a month. Okay. So $1,500 a month plus $700 a month is $2,200 a month. So if they filed taxes jointly, they're going to pay $3,500 a month. If they file separately and do this double debt loophole is what we call it, then that's $2,200 a month. So that net difference is $1,300 a month. So if you multiply that by 12, you're talking a little over $15,000 a year.
Okay. All of the terminology and numbers I was lost a long time ago, but I can definitely take away $1,200 difference a month. That's pretty significant.
Well, that's yeah. So that's $15,000 a year. And that's just one example of a loophole that people would definitely not notice at all on their own. Somebody on a Facebook group would definitely miss that because it's very complicated. And it's not necessarily that uncommon. One spouse has a lot of debt for medical school. The other spouse maybe had some family support. The family paid for a lot of their medical school, so they came out with a lot less. And there's also tax considerations. You have to figure out what the tax penalty is for that couple. It might be not very much at all, in which case, we can kind of call that out and tell the person, hey, that $15,000 a year is true savings you can kind of plan for based on the rules today. So that's $15,000. I'll give you, I guess, a different example. So say someone who is a primary care doc, owns their own practice, is married to, let's say, a stay-at-home spouse. So let's say they live in Idaho or California, one of the community property states. So if they filed jointly, let's say they're going to have to pay $2,000 a month based on their income-based plan. But if they file separately for taxes and they distribute their income evenly, then they might only have to pay $1,000 a month. So you might cut their payment in half. Take that over 10 years or 20 years. I mean, that savings can be a six-figure number that they're saving just based off of knowing the rules and implementing the rules better. So that's another example. You could get into people who don't really do forgiveness the right way. They'll try to pay their loans back or something. That's a really common mistake. So like somebody is going to get public service loan forgiveness, but then they refinance because they got something in the mail. Well, that's a six-figure mistake, right? That costs somebody the equivalent of 1 or 2 years worth of their pay by making that decision and panicking and refinancing. I see that all the time. I saw on a Facebook group, I saw somebody say, I'm so glad I just decided this uncertainty was just too much for me, and I decided to refinance my $450,000 medical school loans. So this was somebody that was a 200K, 250K kind of income person in a high tax state, like a New York or California. So she was only about 3 or 4 years away from PSLF. So I calculated that she cost herself about 4 years worth of take-home salary.
Wow.
4 years. And the reason was because she had seen so many things on this Facebook group that caused her anxiety about planning on forgiveness. And she ended up making that decision out of anxiety and fear because of all the things that she had seen. And then she was now encouraging other people to similarly react based on their anxiety and fear and make an awful decision and drive off the cliff with her. And I tried to, lovingly say on the Facebook group, please, everyone, do not do this. Like, if you're in a private practice environment and you are surely going to stick with that, then consider it, sure. But mods, please consider removing this, because this person's encouraging others to make a six-figure mistake with their finances. I feel bad for the person. I'm not criticizing the person, but I don't want that person to lead anyone astray either. So that's a great example of someone reacting to sort of their loans in an emotional way versus a kind of a rational way. And again, this person made this decision because they were bombarded by all of this stuff that just stressed them out. And student loans don't have to be stressful. They can be something that you just kind of understand by doing your own research, or you hire somebody to understand them, explain them for you, and making sure you have the right plan. And then you just execute the plan and you just put it on autopilot. It doesn't have to be stressful. But a lot of people just let this thing become the most stressful thing in the world. And golly, with everything going on in the world today and all the pain and all the issues that the world's facing, I mean, all that stuff is, I think, a lot more stressful than student loans.
So it's multifactorial. Depends on who you're married to, what their occupation is, what state you live in. I'm assuming there are even some different rules that could apply to students or physicians in the future that are not yet married that could still benefit from some of these. Where can these students and future physicians go to learn a little bit more about this?
Yeah, I mean, like the Student Loan Planner podcast that we have is probably the top resource I would suggest, because you'll get to listen to a lot of different things. The other thing I would suggest is studentloanplanner.com. Our blog has a free calculator to download that a lot of people say is the one resource they use to figure this out. So that's the free resource if you want to download that on our website, studentloanplanner.com. And then if you need somebody to just figure it out for you because you do want to pay for professional help, studentloanplanner.com/help. You can check that out. Talk to one of our CPA, CFP, CFA consultants, and we'll get you a plan.
Sounds good. Well, I think that is a lot of useful information. I'm definitely going to check it out since I'm still constantly getting refi notices every month or so. And Travis Hornsby, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Chase.
Our mission is to inspire, encourage, and inform students as you journey through a rigorous and intricate process of achieving your dreams in medicine. Visit us at prospectivedoctor.com and medschoolcoach.com for more essential resources in your medical school journey and beyond.